No longer content with ruling from the shadows, Mexico's cartels have taken a terrifying step forward. Deep in the mountains, a new kind of soldier is rising. Cartel-trained commandos armed like armies and sworn to crush the state itself. Armored convoys roll through the night, their insignias unseen, their orders deadly clear. Destroy the government. But who created them? And how did Mexico's criminal underworld build its own special forces? Join us as we uncover the secret war the cartels just launched to destroy the government and don't want the world to see. Mexico has reached a decisive turning point. The government has deployed an elite military strike force with one mission: to eliminate every cartel operating within its borders. It is, in every sense, a declaration of war, a sweeping campaign against some of the world's most powerful and violent criminal empires. Almost immediately, security analysts and former U.S. Special Forces veterans warned that such an operation could unleash consequences far worse than the problem it seeks to solve. For decades, Mexico's cartels have generated billions through drug trafficking, human smuggling, and arms sales. Those profits have allowed them to take deep root in the nation's political, economic, and social systems. They aren't isolated in jungles or deserts. They are embedded in communities, influencing local business, policing, and politics. This makes any simple military solution almost impossible. A vivid example of this reality came in 2019 during the Battle of Culiacan. On October 17th, Mexican Special Forces raided a safe house in the Tres Rios district to capture Ovidio Guzman, son of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The elite GAF unit secured Ovidio within minutes, a flawless success on paper. But within half an hour, chaos erupted. Encrypted messages triggered a rapid response. More than 700 armed sicarios flooded the streets with 50 caliber machine guns, rocket launchers, and armored trucks. Burning buses blocked roads, gunfire rained from rooftops, and smoke covered the city. Civilians fled as neighborhoods turned into battlefields. By late afternoon, government forces were surrounded. Intelligence later confirmed over 150 cartel vehicles had mobilized, a coordinated military-style counterattack facing civilian deaths and hostage crises. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador made the controversial call to release a video. The decision sparked outrage. Videos of burning streets spread across social media, and U.S. officials condemned it as a surrender. DEA data later linked the Sinaloa cartel to nearly 98% of the fentanyl entering the U.S. The release exposed the fragility of Mexico's security system and emboldened the cartels further. Cutting off a cartel's leader or income rarely destroys it. It splinters, creating smaller, more violent factions. Mexico's new campaign risks repeating that cycle, producing even more brutal groups than those it seeks to destroy. And history shows what happens next. When Mexico first declared war on the cartels in 2006, the response was swift and merciless. Assassinations, massacres, and years of bloodshed that claimed tens of thousands of lives. The lesson is clear: these organizations never surrender quietly. Officials have compared the new strategy to Plan Colombia, the US-backed effort that dismantled the FARC insurgency. But the comparison fails. Colombia faces a single unified movement. Mexico faces more than 10 rival cartels, each with its own army, economy, and political ties. This isn't one war, it's many, overlapping and uncontrolled, more like a fractured mafia conflict than a traditional counterinsurgency. U.S. military analysts warn that Mexico's fight cannot resemble Iraq or Fallujah. This is not an enemy state. It's a neighbor and ally where every civilian death carries enormous political and moral cost. Yet despite the warnings, leaders on both sides hail the crackdown as a historic breakthrough. The truth may be far darker. It could become one of the bloodiest counterinsurgencies of the modern era, waged just beyond or even within America's borders. If Mexico's war is the powder keg, America's response could be the spark. As Mexican troops move through cartel strongholds, the United States has been waging its own shadow campaign, including mass deportations, fortified borders, and covert intelligence operations that blur the line between counterterrorism and counter-narcotics. This isn't about saving Mexico. It's about protecting American soil from fentanyl, heroin, meth, and human trafficking. Overdose deaths now claim hundreds of thousands of young Americans each year, silent casualties in a war few leaders openly name. That's why some in Washington want to label the cartels as terrorist organizations. Former President Donald Trump made that threat explicit, warning that any attack on U.S. personnel would trigger full military retaliation. "You hurt a border agent, you hurt a soldier," his border chief Tom Homan said. The wrath of President Trump's going to come down. It wasn't bluster, it was a promise that America was ready to treat cartels like foreign terror groups. But that poses a dangerous paradox. Once America declares open war, it becomes part of a conflict that a single strike cannot end. History shows how cartels respond, with blood in the streets. A 2020 intelligence review revealed that cartels like Sinaloa and CJNG now possess arsenals rivaling small armies, grenade launchers, anti-tank weapons, and combat drones. Over the years, one analyst noted, they've built an arsenal that rivals small armies. These aren't street gangs. They are disciplined, well-funded forces operating just hours from U.S. cities. That reality has pushed U.S. agencies, DEA, FBI, ICE, and CIA, into deeper, riskier infiltration efforts across both countries. Lacking clear intelligence, U.S. authorities have turned to a blunt tool: mass deportation. ICE records show tens of thousands of suspected cartel affiliates have been rounded up and sent back to Mexico. The goal is simple: send the problem back. But the result is anything but simple. Deporting hardened criminals doesn't weaken the cartels, it feeds them. Even Tom Homan admitted that many deportees go straight back into cartel networks. In other words, the U.S. is removing violent offenders only for cartels to recruit them again. It's a cycle with no end. Washington presents it as a victory against organized crime, but in truth, it reinforces the same organizations it aims to destroy. Meanwhile, the southern border has become a militarized wall: steel barriers, razor wire, soldiers, and drones stretching across the frontier. Officially, the purpose is to stop illegal crossings. In reality, it's about cutting off cartel trade routes. For now, analysts say the plan is working. But starving the cartels of billions won't make them quit. It could drive them to retaliate. Experts warn that Mexico's chaos could soon cross into U.S. cities: San Antonio, Phoenix, San Diego. They fear the same car bombings and assassinations that scarred Mexico could reach American streets. Cartels already operate inside the U.S. through money laundering fronts and hidden distribution networks. If that pipeline is cut, those networks have both the motive and capacity to strike back. What politicians rarely admit is simple: America's war on the cartels has never been clean, contained, or new. For decades, the U.S. has shaped outcomes abroad, sometimes with success, often with heavy unintended consequences. Plan Colombia is proof. Washington poured more than $15 billion into a 20-year campaign to crush South America's cocaine trade. The FARC eventually laid down arms and entered politics. But the cocaine business didn't disappear. It adapted, shifting routes and methods to survive. That lesson wasn't lost on organized crime elsewhere. Mexico's cartels learned to evolve under pressure, adjusting faster than the forces sent to destroy them. The harder truth is uncomfortable. Sustained U.S. demand for drugs remains the single largest funding source for these organizations. As long as Americans keep buying, profits will keep flowing south. You can capture leaders, raid compounds, and fortify borders, but the vacancies left behind are quickly filled by new, often more ruthless successors. Put together, the current approach forms a self-reinforcing cycle. Militarize the border, choke revenue, deport offenders, and still feed the market that sustains the trade. That pattern is not a strategy for resolution. It is a formula for endless violence. So let's rip off the bandage and examine the few tools that could actually break the cartel's hold, and why most politicians lack the will to use them. Cartels are businesses first and armies second. Like any business, they survive on steady cash flow. Cutting off that money cripples their power, a tactic proven against groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS through frozen accounts, disrupted transfers, and intercepted smuggling routes. In the United States, cartel funds flow through legitimate facades: real estate, car dealerships, shipping firms, and even regulated cannabis ventures, all laundering billions under respectable names. That's why many financial investigators insist the most potent weapon isn't a rifle, but a forensic audit that traces money through shell companies, crypto wallets, and offshore accounts. The obstacle is clear. Cartels are masters of concealment, using layers of corporations, cryptocurrencies, and foreign banks. Exposing those channels would require financial transparency that America rarely imposes on its wealthiest citizens. Worsening the problem is a thin U.S. intelligence picture inside Mexico. Every raid or strike risks being launched on incomplete data, and a missed target can mean civilian deaths and propaganda victories for traffickers. This reality has driven U.S. officials to push for extraditions, a tactic that removes kingpins from local reach and ends their influence behind prison walls. The capture and transfer of El Chapo Guzman proved its value, ending years of escapes and manipulation. However, extradition also stirs nationalist resentment in Mexico, which many see as a blow to sovereignty and a public humiliation. At the far edge of policy debate lies the unthinkable: full-scale U.S. military escalation against Mexican cartels, drone strikes, marine deployments, and open warfare against groups designated as terrorists. In classified Pentagon simulations, this scenario has already been mapped out. Airstrikes on drug labs, naval blockades to choke supply routes, and special operations raids on cartel strongholds. On paper, it could work. The United States has the firepower to dismantle cartel networks within weeks. According to Global Firepower, the U.S. military fields about 1.3 million active-duty personnel and nearly 800,000 reservists, with over 4 million draft-eligible citizens, if ever needed. Its scale dwarfs any criminal organization on Earth. Yet Mexico's cartels are far from insignificant. Collectively, they employ roughly 175,000 people, making them, in effect, the nation's fifth-largest employer. Across Latin America's 1.7 million prisoners, they recruit relentlessly, refilling their ranks from inside the prison system. The process is slow but steady, ensuring resilience under pressure. But military strength alone does not guarantee victory. The cartel's greatest weapon isn't manpower or machinery, it's fear. In 2012, 80% of Mexicans supported military action against the cartels. By 2023, that confidence had collapsed. Surveys by Border Report found that in cartel-dominated cities like Juarez and Mexicali, 70% of adults felt unsafe in their own homes. In Reynosa, fear reached 83%, and in Zacatecas, where bodies hang from bridges and fill abandoned vehicles, 92% of residents said they lived in fear. That fear sustains cartel power. Communities often know where criminals operate but stay silent. The threat of abduction or death keeps civilians obedient and shields cartel activity from exposure. For that reason, the U.S. cannot simply storm Mexican cities. Cartel fighters blend seamlessly into civilian populations, turning urban warfare into a humanitarian nightmare. Any intervention must therefore be surgical, guided by precision intelligence and careful movement through densely populated zones. Although Mexico technically allows civilian gun ownership, all legal sales occur through a single military-run gun store in Mexico City. This means cartels arm themselves almost entirely through smuggling. By 2009, authorities had seized more than 4,400 modified rifles, many converted to automatic fire. Tens of thousands more remained in circulation, mostly AR-15 and AK-47s, traced back to the United States. More troubling is the flow of heavier weapons. Evidence shows guided anti-armor systems like javelins, stingers, and AT-4s entering cartel hands through illicit transfers and black market diversions. These weapons raise the stakes of any direct engagement, turning raids into potential urban battlefields. Even so, America's military advantage remains overwhelming. Thousands of tanks, artillery units, and armored vehicles, supported by advanced infantry weapons and missile systems, ensure dominance in open combat, but raw firepower alone cannot solve a conflict fought among civilians. Every strike risks collateral damage. Every operation demands restraint. A U.S. campaign would likely begin with containment, not assault. Forces would encircle target cities, establish checkpoints, and issue public warnings through local media, Civilians would be told to shelter indoors as schools and businesses shut down. Only after intelligence verification and evacuation would armored convoys advance, block by block, isolating cartel zones and dismantling strongholds with minimal civilian harm. Intelligence drives every step. Drones, satellites, and local informants pinpoint high-value targets, guiding troops through narrow streets where cartel gunmen fight from rooftops and alleys. Clashes are fast and violent, AR-15s and AK-47s against M4s and armored support. Backed by coordination and training, U.S. units typically force retreats within hours. But even under pressure, the cartels are experts at escape. Decades of conflict have taught them to vanish. Smuggling tunnels once used for drugs now double as evacuation routes. In 2022, a 1,700-foot tunnel running from Tijuana to a warehouse in San Diego was discovered, 61 feet underground, and fitted with a rail system. El Chapo's famous prison escape used the same method. Countless similar tunnels likely crisscross Mexico, providing quick escape routes in hidden logistics. To counter this, joint U.S.-Mexican forces rely on combined intelligence, sealing exits, deploying sensors, and launching rapid follow-up raids. Even partial successes matter. Each operation scatters personnel, seizes weapons, and fractures the chain of command. The lesson is clear. Dismantling the cartels does not require total war. Cutting off resources, restricting mobility, and breaking communications can cripple them without citywide destruction. At sea, the cartel's empire stretches far beyond Mexico's shores, as Rear Admiral Christopher Tomey of the U.S. Coast Guard revealed in 2015, over 95% of drugs entering the United States travel by water. They use cargo ships, yachts, fishing boats, and even handmade fiberglass and wooden submarines. Stealthy but fragile. Here, U.S. dominance is absolute. The Navy's 440 warships, including 11 aircraft carriers, 9 helicopter carriers, and 81 destroyers, ensure unmatched power. Projection cartels possess no weapon capable of threatening them. Supporting the fleet are 70 submarines and dozens of corvettes capable of erasing cartel submersibles with a single strike. The real challenge is not combat, but detection. Smugglers often hide contraband aboard legitimate cargo vessels, making identification difficult. The U.S. Navy responds with layered blockades, one in the Gulf of Mexico, another in the Pacific, and a third near the Yucatan Channel. These maritime operations synchronize with ground offensives, closing every known route. In the air, cartels rely solely on logistics. Between 2006 and 2015, authorities seized nearly 600 planes and helicopters linked to the Sinaloa cartel. Thousands of clandestine airstrips, many hidden deep in forests or deserts, support these flights. Their aircraft, mostly Cessnas and Gulfstreams, move drugs and cash but cannot fight. The United States, however, commands around 13,000 aircraft, including 1,800 fighters, 900 attack jets, and thousands of transport planes and helicopters. This ensures total air superiority. Yet Washington exercises restraint, focusing on neutralizing airstrips and isolating smuggling routes rather than bombing populated zones. Recent surveillance operations have intensified these efforts. Once a hidden landing strip or trafficking route is confirmed, it is swiftly destroyed, cutting off critical corridors the cartels rely on, combined with tighter airport inspections and scrutiny of private aircraft. This campaign has effectively grounded much of the cartel air fleet. Smugglers now depend on a handful of helicopters, none capable of matching U.S. reach or sophistication. The balance of power now tilts decisively toward the United States. Even while limiting its full capabilities to protect civilians, America has struck cartel strongholds, imposed a naval blockade, and secured near total control of Mexican airspace. Yet the cartel's resilience comes from something deeper than weapons and money. Estimates of cartel revenue vary. In 2019, Senator David Perdue described the drug trade as a multi-billion-dollar empire, possibly worth $500 billion. Larger than Walmart. Other reports place annual earnings between $6 and $29 billion. Homeland Security estimated that in 2021 alone, cartels made about $13 billion from human trafficking and smuggling. While far below the U.S. defense budget, these sums are enough to buy loyalty, fund weapons, and sustain operations. This financial power explains America's naval blockade. With 95% of cartel drugs shipped by sea, closing ports chokes their main revenue stream, the remaining cash reserves become finite, limiting their ability to bribe, rearm, or expand. Simultaneously, U.S. intelligence targets drug labs and production hubs, dismantling the infrastructure that fuels their economy. Disrupting outside supply chains also weakens them. Around 90% of cocaine entering the U.S. originates in Colombia before crossing Mexican territory. By tightening naval patrols in the South Pacific and checkpoints in Central America, Washington aims to starve the cartels of revenue and force internal fractures. And those fractures may prove decisive. Mexico's criminal underworld is not united. It's divided into at least 10 major groups, including Sinaloa, Jalisco New Generation, the Gulf Cartel, and Juarez. Constant infighting over territory and leadership prevents any unified resistance. As U.S. pressure mounts, that fragmentation becomes fatal. Disconnected factions struggle to coordinate, and rival bosses turn on each other in chaos. Eventually, internal disorganization and external force combine to destroy what fear and money once held together. The night sky lit up with fire as the United States fighter jets roared into action, unleashing a strike that reduced a secret cartel fentanyl lab to rubble in seconds. This was America's power in full display in the war with cartels. With fentanyl overdoses now killing more than 84,000 Americans every year, the stakes have never been higher. Is this the beginning of something much bigger? And how far will the United States go to crush the cartels once and for all? Join us as we find out just how far America is willing to go in its battle against the fentanyl crisis. At 30,000 feet, 12 F-22 Raptors move across the sky like shadows. No sound trails behind them, and no warning betrays their approach. On radar screens, they are ghosts. Far below, hidden beneath a thick canopy, a billion-dollar fentanyl complex runs without pause, relying on terrain and secrecy for protection. But this is not a mission of bullets or firefights. What follows is not noise or spectacle, but a strike shaped by silence and exact control. The F-22 was built to vanish. Its edges are cut to deflect radar, and the skin of the jet is layered with special coatings that swallow signals before they can return to the source. Even the engines are buried behind curved ducts that keep reflections from giving away their position. Decades of engineering produced a jet that slips through modern defenses as if they were never there. Avoiding detection is more than just shape and coating. The F-22 manages its heat output so efficiently that infrared sensors read little more than background air. Radio chatter is cut to almost nothing. When pilots do communicate, it is through encrypted bursts so short they vanish in a blink. Secure satellites carry their data, separate from civilian networks, ensuring nothing leaks into the open. Every system works toward the same goal: get close, strike, and disappear. Each Raptor carries 2 GBU-39 small-diameter bombs. At 250 pounds each, they are compact but devastatingly accurate. GPS guidance steers them to within 3 feet of a target. If jamming disrupts the signal, laser guidance finishes the job. The smaller size of the bomb allows Raptors to carry more weapons without compromising stealth, and the focus blast means a single building can be destroyed without flattening everything around it. The chosen target sits deep in Sinaloa's wilderness. Workers in masks handle chemicals inside a facility capable of producing enough fentanyl to kill tens of millions. For years, the jungle's cover kept sites like this out of reach. That advantage is gone. Synthetic aperture radar can now pierce clouds in the canopy. Thermal sensors pick up the faint glow of generators. Intercepted communications map the hierarchy of cartel leaders. Tools first used against terror networks in Afghanistan and Iraq now turn against organized crime with the same precision. With the target confirmed, the command is given: execute. The Raptors close in, still invisible to Mexican radar. 24 bombs drop at once, falling clean through the sky without trails or thunder. Gravity pulls them down, guided all the way to the mark. The first explosion tears into the heart of the compound, shaking the jungle for miles. The second touches off chemical storage tanks, setting off a chain reaction that rips the site apart. In a matter of seconds, the billion-dollar facility is reduced to a crater of scorched earth and twisted debris. What once fueled global trade is gone, By the time local security forces respond, the jets have vanished. Radar never registered them. The skies look untouched. The only sign comes from intercepted cartel messages, frantic voices repeating a single phrase. They know where we are. This is stealth warfare, no spectacle, no drawn-out exchange. Just the certainty that when the strike comes, it is sudden, silent, and final. Then the Raptors vanish once more, leaving only fear in the silence overhead. The crater in Sinaloa was more than the destruction of one lab. It signaled the unraveling of empires crafted by men who believed terrain and corruption made them untouchable. These were not street dealers. They were architects of billion-dollar syndicates that operated like shadow governments. But who were the minds behind these fortresses that defied states for decades? Rafael Caro Quintero earned the title Narco of Narcos by rewriting the playbook of the drug trade. In the 1980s, this Sinaloa native did not simply move cocaine. He engineered the first major pipeline linking Colombian cartels through Mexican corridors into American cities. His Guadalajara cartel became the prototype for every organization that followed. Ruthless violence fused with logistical discipline, shifting narcotics from street sales to industrial-scale distribution. Quintero's empire collapsed after one fatal miscalculation. DEA agent Enrique Camarena uncovered too much: routes, contacts, and operations. In retaliation, cartel gunmen abducted him, and after 30 hours of torture, left his body sealed in plastic. The 1985 murder triggered international outrage and a manhunt that ended with Quintero locked in prison. But prison was temporary. In 2013, a Mexican court freed him on a legal technicality. At 60, instead of fading into retirement, he vanished into Sinaloa's mountains. From bunkers carved into rock, he rebuilt operations with satellite internet, encrypted devices, and tunnel systems that allowed entire networks to function unseen. The Trevino Morales brothers added a new terrifying dimension. Miguel, Z40, and Omar, Z42, were not traditional traffickers. Both were elite soldiers from Mexico's special forces who deserted to form the backbone of Los Zetas. Years of military discipline had reshaped the cartel into something more than a criminal outfit. It became a paramilitary machine. Under the Zetas' command came armored trucks, night vision gear, and assaults so well coordinated they looked like full-scale military operations. More deserters were drawn to their ranks, and what started as an enforcement arm soon grew into one of the most feared cartels Mexico had ever seen. They didn't stop at drug trafficking. Kidnapping, human smuggling, and extortion became part of their empire, spreading fear across entire states. Even when the leaders were locked behind bars, their power reached out through coded notes and corrupt officials who carried out orders on the outside. And then there was Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, another figure who carried on a legacy of blood and violence. When his brother Amado, the Lord of the Skies, died during botched plastic surgery in 1997, Vicente inherited the Juarez cartel. He turned Ciudad Juarez into one of the deadliest battlefields of the 21st century. Between 2008 and 2012, more than 10,000 lives were claimed as rival cartels clashed for control of the Juarez-El Paso crossings. These bridges were gateways worth billions, where every shipment into the United States represented fortunes. For Vicente, geography decided everything. To lock down his territory, he bought off police forces, slipped money into judges' pockets, and secured protection from officials who should have stood against him. Violence was the tool he used to strike fear, but corruption was the armor that made him untouchable. These weren't street thugs. They operated on another level. They raised armies, taxed whole communities, enforced their own rules, and built black market economies strong enough to rival real governments. The strength of their empires was buried out of sight. Their labs were dug in and fortified, run like clockwork with crews rotating around the clock. Generators kept the power steady, cutting off outside eyes. And when the pressure came from law enforcement, escape tunnels gave their bosses a clean way out. The structures they designed and perfected became blueprints for the cartels that dominate today. Intelligence reports estimate the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels now control more than 60% of global fentanyl production, operating on frameworks designed by Quintero, the Treviños, and Carrillo Fuentes. These networks endured assassinations, arrests, and full-scale military campaigns, reshaping themselves into syndicates strong enough to survive long after their founders were gone. For years, these masterminds believed their mountains and alliances rendered them immune to outside power. But surveillance satellites, synthetic aperture radar, and thermal imaging were already sketching bullseyes over the facilities they thought could never be touched. The men who built cartel empires believed their mountain strongholds and political protection made them untouchable. For decades, they lived as though hidden in plain sight. What they didn't see coming was that the same technology once aimed at Moscow's missile fields would eventually turn south, peeling back every layer of secrecy they thought would last forever. The U-2 Dragon Lady still climbs into the sky at dawn, its long wings flexing as engines push the aircraft towards 70,000 feet. In the Cold War, this spy plane brought back photos of nuclear launch sites deep inside Soviet territory. Now its cameras pivot toward Mexico, where its lenses read license plates and track convoys through cartel countries, all while the aircraft stays legally outside the border. On paper, it looks like a routine patrol. In reality, it's one of the most sophisticated intelligence missions of America's modern drug war. Washington doesn't wait. Where there was one flight a month, there are suddenly nearly 20 in less than 2 weeks. Aircraft designed to track submarines beneath Arctic ice or missiles across Siberia are redirected to the deserts and jungles of the Americas. The Cold War arsenal has found a new enemy. The Navy's P-8 Poseidon, a maritime hunter built to stalk Russian subs across the Pacific, now sweeps over the borderlands. Its sensor pods, worth more than the annual defense budget of some nations, can crack encrypted radios, listen in from hundreds of miles, and cut through storms or darkness to reveal facilities long thought invisible. The same technology that once searched for steel hulls beneath the polar seas now exposes fentanyl labs hidden under jungle canopy. Then comes the breakthrough, synthetic aperture radar. Instead of photographs, it builds maps by bouncing radio waves off the ground, revealing tunnels, airstrips, and bunkers that standard surveillance can't touch. Cartel compounds carved into mountains appear on American screens with the kind of detail engineers once reserved for Soviet launch silos. Drones join the hunt. Predators redeployed from Middle Eastern battlefields circle quietly over the South, listening for every whisper of digital life. Cell phones, satellite links, and encrypted apps are all vacuumed up and processed before cartel leaders even realize their messages were sent. What once felt like secure communication now betrays them with every call. The shock inside cartel ranks is instant. Intercepts show bosses abandoning long-used safe houses overnight, convinced the walls themselves are betraying them. No matter how often the convoys change their routes, satellites still manage to track them with exact precision. The remote terrain that once kept them hidden now works against them, turning those same stretches of land into perfect targets for strikes launched from far away. Thermal imaging reads the heat of workers laboring in bunkers. Signals intelligence turns encrypted satellite phones into glowing beacons for American operators. What criminals built as fortresses now serve as targets. For cartels, the message is unmistakable. The invisible have become visible. The tools built to keep superpowers in check are now dismantling their empires, one coordinate at a time. The hunters were now the hunted. Tools once built for Cold War standoffs had been repurposed, aimed not at Moscow but at Mexico's mountains. Is this setting the stage for a political gamble that would redraw the lines of America's war on crime? On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump signed an order in the Oval Office that formally reclassified Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. The move shifted their legal standing from criminal groups to the same category as organizations such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The consequences were immediate. Intelligence agencies gained new authority for covert action, untethered from law enforcement's red tape. The Pentagon could apply the same counterterrorism playbook once used in Iraq and Afghanistan, this time on cartel targets just across the border. What had been a fight against crime became, legally, a war. For anyone tied to cartel networks, the designation was a nightmare. Prosecutors could now pursue terrorism charges not just for drug smuggling, but for anything deemed material support. Paying protection money, running goods through cartel corridors, and even sending family cash back home risked being recast as aiding terrorists, an offense carrying decades in prison. The first test case came quickly. Maria del Rosario Navarro Sanchez, a 39-year-old Mexican woman accused of supplying grenades to the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, was indicted as a terrorism supporter. Her golden AR-15 rifle, nicknamed El Dorado, was paraded in court as proof. The shock rippled through cartel ranks as lawyers realized the old rules of prosecution no longer applied. Trump wielded more than law. At dawn, he turned to Twitter, threatening 25% tariffs on all Mexican imports unless President Claudia Sheinbaum crushed the cartels. With $400 billion in annual trade on the line, the threat landed like a hammer. For Mexico's leaders, the past was never far away. The United States' 1914 occupation of Veracruz remained a raw memory, taught in schools, retold in family stories, and embedded in the country's politics. The sight of American forces massing at the border, captured in new satellite images, stirred those memories. Inside Sheinbaum's cabinet, comparisons to Veracruz surfaced in hushed conversations. Some warned that history had a way of circling back when least expected. In public, Sheinbaum projected defiance. Before the cameras, she denounced Washington's threats and promised that Mexico would not be bullied into submission. Her words struck the right chord for evening newscasts, giving anxious citizens the sense that their president would not bend to outside pressure. Privately, the situation was far more delicate. Trump's warnings hinted at direct military action, and the weight of those threats could not be ignored. In a calculated move, Sheinbaum authorized limited United States surveillance flights from a discreet airfield outside Mexico City. It was a concession meant to cool tempers in Washington without stirring outrage at home. The response escalated. 10,000 Mexican troops poured into the northern states, chasing the same targets Washington wanted destroyed. Behind the scenes, foreign ministers scrambled to keep diplomacy alive. Then came the shock move. Before dawn, Mexican authorities extracted 29 cartel bosses from prisons across the country. Rafael Caro Quintero, the narco of narcos, whose killing of DEA agent Enrique Camarena had poisoned relations for decades, was put on a plane. Alongside him were Vicente Carrillo Fuentes of the Juarez cartel and the Trevino Morales brothers of Los Zetas. It was a logistical feat that looked like something from wartime. Simultaneous transfers, heavy escorts, and United States aircraft standing by to scatter prisoners to 8 different cities under federal indictment. It was also unprecedented. Mexico had always extradited piecemeal after years of legal wrangling. Sending 29 kingpins in one sweep reeked of desperation, but it worked. Trump announced a temporary freeze on tariffs, praising Mexico's cooperation while demanding further crackdowns, especially on fentanyl production. The message was clear. The cartels were no longer just criminals. They were enemies of the state, and the rules of engagement had changed. But rules on paper are one thing. Outcomes on the ground are another. When the United States government decided to label Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, it gave officials new powers to go after them. For the first time, the United States could use military-style tactics that had previously only been used against groups like Al-Qaeda overseas. The first big action was an airstrike on a Sinaloa cartel drug lab. Right away, signs of disruption appeared. Communications showed that cartel commanders abandoned safe houses they had used for years. Supply convoys stopped running on normal routes because drivers feared being spotted from above. Even secure drug labs were left empty. Workers realized that bunkers and underground sites could not protect them from satellite-guided bombs. United States monitoring of cartel radio traffic showed leaders becoming more secretive, using codes and limiting their communication out of fear it could be tracked. This fear spread quickly. Rival leaders accused each other of working with United States intelligence, which led to violent internal purges. In Culiacan, killings rose sharply from 39 a month to 116 by October 2024, according to Insight Crime. Groups also took advantage of the chaos to fight over territory. Analysts said that trust inside the cartels was breaking down. Some cartel members who had once obeyed orders without hesitation began to grow uneasy, fearing their movements and safe houses were already known. That hesitation chipped away at discipline and made it harder for the groups to stay organized. Meanwhile, the United States pressure started to show results. In early 2025, the DEA announced record-breaking drug seizures, nearly 10,000 kilograms of fentanyl and more than 50,000 kilograms of methamphetamine, the highest amounts ever documented. Diplomatic moves soon followed. The United States paused planned tariffs for 30 days after Mexico deployed 10,000 troops to border regions and handed over 29 cartel leaders to United States custody. These moves opened space for deeper cooperation between the two governments. Cartels found ways to adapt. Some groups started looking beyond the United States, shifting more operations toward Europe and Asia. There were reports of drones being tested, either for keeping watch or for possible attacks. Others began working on cyber tools meant to interfere with government systems. Smuggling routes changed as well. More shipments went by sea through Central America, often hidden in submersibles or fast boats. Small planes were used for airdrops in desert regions, a way to dodge the satellite tracking that made land routes more dangerous. Leaders also spread out power across different cells so that one raid couldn't take down the whole network. The fentanyl crisis is still one of the biggest battles America faces. In 2024, more than 84,000 people died from overdoses, a number that shows how deep the problem runs. Experts point out that as long as people keep searching for these drugs, traffickers will always find ways to supply them. But there are signs of a shift. United States forces are no longer just responding to cartel moves. They're shutting down labs, intercepting submarines packed with drugs, and breaking up networks before shipments reach American soil. At the same time, new investments are going into treatment, mental health services, and rebuilding communities, steps that cut off the demand cartels depend on. The fight isn't over, but for the first time, America looks like it's gaining the upper hand. The cartels are under pressure, and the momentum is starting to turn. The U.S. has unveiled a secret weapon that could change the rules of engagement against the cartels forever. For years, the military has developed this ultimate fighter jet under a classified program, shrouded in mystery and designed to strike enemy strongholds. Now, key stats have leaked, and the implications are staggering. Cartel compounds across Mexico, once untouchable, may no longer stand a chance. Precision, speed, and overwhelming firepower could annihilate entire operations in seconds. Can the cartels survive this new era of aerial dominance? Join us as we reveal how the U.S. secret fighter jet could redefine combat against Mexico's deadliest cartels. For more than 2 decades, Mexico has been locked in a brutal struggle against its drug cartels, but the battlefield has shifted. These groups are no longer just traffickers. They have evolved into highly militarized, territorial forces capable of going toe-to-toe with state armies. Armed with improvised explosive devices, drone-delivered bombs, anti-material rifles, and heavily reinforced vehicles, the cartels now operate more like insurgent armies than traditional criminal organizations. They recruit foreign mercenaries, train in advanced combat tactics, and control vast swaths of territory, nearly a third of Mexico as of mid-2024. But now the tides are about to turn. The United States is ready to strike decisively, targeting cartel strongholds and neutralizing their arsenals in an instant with a new secret weapon, a next-generation fighter jet. In March 2025, the United States unveiled the F-47 fighter jet, the most advanced aircraft ever deployed in aerial warfare. It is the centerpiece of the Air Force's next-generation air dominance program, designed to eventually replace the F-22 Raptor fleet. The program uses a family of systems approach centered on a fast, long-range, stealthy sensor shooter fighter, originally called the Penetrating Counter-Air, or PCA. The F-47's development began over a decade ago under the NGAD program, which tested and refined advanced technologies through experimental X-planes. By 2023, the Air Force envisioned a fleet of next-generation fighters working alongside hundreds of integrated drones, forming a coordinated network capable of dominating contested skies and outmatching even the most heavily armed criminal organizations. The program, however, faced turbulence. The NGAD development contract was scheduled for selection in 2024, yet rising costs, with each fighter projected at 3 times the price of an F-35 Lightning II, forced a temporary pause. The Air Force conducted a thorough study to determine whether the NGAD program could ensure air superiority against rapidly advancing global threats. By early 2025, the conclusion was clear. NGAD was the only viable option to maintain dominance in contested environments. Military leaders emphasized that sixth-generation crewed aircraft would be essential to counter new, sophisticated adversary fighters. On March 21, 2025, President Donald Trump officially announced the program would move forward. The centerpiece fighter would be called the F-47, and Boeing was awarded a $20 billion engineering and manufacturing development contract. The F-47 designation honors both the Air Force's legacy and the vision of creating the world's first sixth-generation fighter. The program also revitalized Boeing's military aviation division, positioning it at the forefront of next-generation U.S. air power. Since 2020, the Air Force has flown X-planes, experimental aircraft designed to test and refine the F-47's revolutionary systems. Air Force Chief of Staff General David Allvin confirmed the first full flight is expected by early 2029, near the end of President Trump's term. In May, General Allvin released a striking infographic revealing just how far the F-47 and its supporting drones surpass the capabilities of current fourth and fifth generation fighters. The first headline from the data: the F-47's combat range is estimated at around 10,000 nautical miles. This is unprecedented for a U.S. fighter jet and places the aircraft well ahead of anything currently in service. Such an extended range is not just a numerical advantage, it fundamentally expands the operational reach of America's air power. A range of this magnitude also suggests that the F-47 is designed to confront one of modern warfare's most complex challenges: anti-access area denial, or A2AD, bubbles. According to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, an A2AD bubble is intended to function as an impenetrable zone of aerial defenses. By deploying overlapping anti-air systems, adversaries create areas where enemy aircraft cannot safely enter without significant risk of being destroyed. The IISS cites Russia's attempts to establish such a bubble over Crimea as a clear example. The region is defended by S-400 and S-300 air defense systems, reinforced by 3K-55 Bastion P and 3K-60 BAL coastal missile systems. Together, these assets are meant to prevent Ukrainian forces from attacking from the air or the Black Sea, effectively forcing them to operate in highly contested zones that were previously permissive. However, the tactic has not fully achieved its intended effect. Ukrainian long-range drones and missiles have successfully penetrated the Russian A2AD bubble multiple times, demonstrating vulnerabilities in even the most sophisticated defense networks. At the same time, no manned Ukrainian fighter, including the country's F-16s, has entered Crimean airspace, underscoring the deterrent effect of such a defensive network. The F-47's exceptional range could provide a decisive counter. With the ability to fly over 1,000 nautical miles, pilots would face fewer constraints from fuel or endurance limits, allowing them to focus fully on penetrating these heavily defended zones. This opens the door to precision strikes against strategic targets that an adversary previously considered untouchable. However, there is a caveat to this impressive range. A combat radius of 1,000 nautical miles represents a significant leap over the U.S. Air Force and Navy's current fighter fleet. As TWZ notes, this figure roughly aligns with the Navy's prediction that the F-47 will exceed the range of any aircraft currently in service by approximately 25%, and it may surpass that margin. For comparison, the F-35C has a range of about 670 nautical miles, a limitation that critics have long argued restricts its ability to strike distant targets. A 25% improvement would place the F-47 at roughly 850 nautical miles, yet its actual range of 1,000 nautical miles exceeds even that projection, marking a major advance in operational reach. But there is a strategic concern. The F-47 is intended to serve as the centerpiece of U.S. aerial superiority for decades. At the same time, the Air Force anticipates that future conflicts will unfold in theaters where counter-air threats extend well beyond 1,000 miles. In other words, air defense systems are expected to grow larger, more capable, and more lethal, potentially outpacing the jet's current range. Put simply, while the F-47's 1,000 nautical mile endurance allows it to penetrate today's A2AD bubbles, it may not be fully future-proofed against the next generation of extended-range defenses. And there is an additional nuance. General Alvin's ex-post did not state a definitive range of 1,000 nautical miles. It referred to 1,000 plus. The meaning of that plus remains unclear. It could indicate a capability of 1,050 nautical miles, or perhaps even 1,250. Until further details emerge, the true extent of the F-47's range, and just how extraordinary it may be, remains an open question. It is also important to note that the 1,000 nautical mile range applies to the base model of America's sixth-generation fighter. Future design tweaks, either before the F-47's unveiling or after it enters service, could further extend its reach. For now, that headline figure defines the jet's extraordinary endurance. But range is only part of the story. After all, long-range capabilities are of little use if a fighter cannot move quickly enough to traverse enemy territory while avoiding advanced counter-air threats. The F-47 addresses this with its second major attribute, speed. The aircraft is expected to exceed Mach 2, more than twice the speed of sound. While other jets, such as Russia's Su-27 or the US F-15, can achieve similar velocities, they trade speed for stealth, making them easier to detect and engage with high-speed counter-air missiles. The challenge lies in heat and radar signatures. Faster flight generates more heat, increasing the jet's visibility to enemy sensors and providing a larger target for infrared-seeking missiles. The F-47, however, is designed to combine exceptional speed with advanced stealth capabilities, allowing it to move through contested airspace with minimal detection. Speed is not just about evasion, it is vital for projecting air power effectively. Modern engagements are likely to take place far from home bases, in contested regions where rapid response, sustained loitering, and precision strikes are essential. The F-47's combination of high speed, extended range, and endurance ensures that pilots can reach targets quickly, provide decisive support, and return safely to friendly territory, even in heavily defended areas. The analysis of the F-47's design almost seems prophetic, describing capabilities years before the statistics became public. The reality is that the two primary challengers to U.S. air supremacy, China and Russia, already possess advanced air defense systems capable of targeting even high-speed fighters like the F-14, which can reach Mach 2.3. This is why stealth has historically been a central focus for U.S. fighter design. Yet future conflicts are expected to unfold differently. Rather than direct confrontations over home territory, potential engagements are likely to occur in contested regions of the developing world. In these scenarios, speed becomes just as critical as stealth. Pilots must have the ability to strike quickly, exploit enemy vulnerabilities, and withdraw before defenses can react. This combination of speed and agility is essential for maintaining operational dominance in an environment where adversaries possess sophisticated counter-air systems. Stealth remains indispensable, and the F-47 incorporates it seamlessly. However, the newly revealed specifications indicate a shift in design philosophy. Speed combined with stealth is now recognized as the defining edge for sixth-generation fighters. Once operational, the F-47 will be capable of striking targets over distant regions, using its speed to penetrate advanced defenses and its stealth to remain undetected, a combination that amplifies its tactical flexibility and lethality. Despite these advancements, key performance details remain unknown. If the F-47's Mach 2 plus speed relies on afterburners, questions remain about its supercruise capabilities, its top speed without afterburners engaged, and the efficiency of sustaining such velocity over long distances. Fuel consumption at maximum speed and endurance under combat conditions is yet to be disclosed. Even so, the F-47 appears to merge the velocity of America's fastest non-stealth fighters with the stealth of slower platforms, such as the F-35 and F-22. Early indications suggest it may surpass both in radar evasion. According to the latest information, the F-47 will feature Stealth Plus Plus technology, a step beyond the F-22's Stealth Plus and the F-35's standard stealth systems. The meaning of Stealth Plus Plus is not fully defined, but it likely represents a significant reduction in radar and infrared signatures. By comparison, the F-22 boasts one of the smallest radar cross-sections of any fighter jet, appearing roughly the size of a marble to enemy radar. While this does not render it invisible, it grants near invisibility in an era dominated by automated aerial defenses. When a radar system detects only a marble-sized object, it is more likely to dismiss the aircraft as a non-threat. This allows the F-22 to approach targets while minimizing the risk of missile engagement. The F-47, with its Stealth ++ designation, could take this a step further. Its radar cross-section may be even smaller than a marble, combining unprecedented stealth with the speed already discussed. This presents a new challenge for U.S. adversaries. They would no longer face merely difficult-to-detect aircraft, but a fighter capable of evading even the most sophisticated defenses. In this scenario, the jet's 1,000 nautical mile-plus range becomes even more significant. Range is useless if the aircraft cannot be detected by enemy systems, but the F-47 may render that concern obsolete. Much about Stealth ++ remains unknown. Early NGAD designs included canards, small forewings ahead of the main wings, which could compromise radar evasion due to increased surface area. Whether these remain in the F-47 is unclear, though concept art suggests they may have been removed. Additionally, details on counterintelligence and electronic warfare systems embedded in the aircraft have not been disclosed. Nevertheless, the designation strongly suggests capabilities beyond those of the F-35 and F-22. General Alvin's post also revealed that the U.S. has placed an initial order for 185 F-47s. This is significant because it mirrors the current F-22 fleet size, raising the possibility that the F-47 is intended to eventually replace the F-22. For an initial fleet of 185 aircraft, the United States would face a staggering $55.5 billion in expenditure. Adding the $20 billion projected for completing the F-47's development phase brings the total investment to roughly $75.5 billion for this next-generation fighter program. While the figure is enormous, it is not unprecedented. The F-22 program, for comparison, cost $70 billion, including $30 billion devoted to research and development. It is possible that some of the technologies developed for the F-22 are being integrated into the F-47, which could help reduce development costs, even as higher per-unit expenses bring the total outlay to a level similar to the earlier program. Adjusting for inflation, this represents a significant but justifiable investment in maintaining U.S. air superiority. The timeline for the F-47's debut is equally ambitious. According to Alvin's graphic, the aircraft is expected to become operational sometime between 2025 and 2029. Given that only concept images have been publicly released, a 2025 flight appears highly unlikely unless the program has been progressing in secret and is far more advanced than currently known. A first flight in 2029 is more plausible, yet even this may only mark the beginning of official test flights rather than full operational service. Analysts suggest that the F-47 could enter active service in the 2030s, aligning with prior projections that indicated a planned service entry around 2030. However, it remains possible that accelerated development and increased investment could bring this milestone forward, potentially allowing the United States to field the world's first sixth-generation fighter sooner than expected. TWZ sought further clarification on the program and received a statement from a U.S. Air Force official. The F-47 is expected to fly during this administration. This suggests that accelerating the jet's first flight has become a priority for the current leadership, though only time will reveal whether this goal will be met. While Alvin's infographic provided detailed statistics for the F-47 itself, it also showed a critical supporting component: the fleet of unmanned drones designed to accompany each fighter. These collaborative combat aircraft, or CCAs, are integral to the sixth-generation package, giving pilots a network of aerial assets far beyond the jet they are actively flying. According to the data, the United States plans to acquire more than 1,000 CCAs, many of which will be YQF-42As or YQF-44As, both developed alongside the F-47. The infographic indicates that the operational entry dates for these drones coincide with the fighter, suggesting a coordinated rollout. It appears that the U.S. may purchase these drones in increments of 100 to 150 units, which could indicate either a phased integration aligned with the 185 F-47s or a simultaneous entry into service, with temporary drones bridging the gap until production of the full CCA fleet is complete. The Air Force also plans to produce approximately 5 CCAs for every F-47, though it is unclear whether each fighter will deploy with all 5 simultaneously, or if a smaller number will accompany the jet while the remainder are held in reserve to replace losses during operations. From a performance perspective, both CCAs are notable for their range. Although they do not match the F-47's 1,000 nautical mile endurance, they can travel approximately 700 nautical miles, a distance comparable to standalone drones, but unprecedented for unmanned systems designed to operate collaboratively with a manned fighter. This discrepancy in range raises interesting questions about how these drones will be employed tactically alongside the F-47, particularly in missions requiring deep penetration of contested airspace. The F-47 has long been assumed to serve as the primary control platform for its accompanying CCAs, though their lower range introduces several operational possibilities. Missions extending beyond 700 nautical miles may require the F-47 to operate without its drones, or there could be alternative control platforms that allow the U.S. to deploy CCAs as needed, linking them dynamically to the appropriate fighter. This raises the potential for swapping CCAs in and out to mitigate range limitations, though these details remain speculative at present. Both CCAs are also believed to incorporate some stealth capabilities, though the extent to which they can evade enemy radar is unknown. They are unlikely to match the F-47 in stealth, primarily due to cost and production constraints. This limitation is offset by their expendable nature. As unmanned platforms, CCAs can be deployed aggressively without risking pilots or the high-value fighter jets controlling them. Speed introduces another disparity. Initial reports indicate that the first CCAs will operate at subsonic velocities, meaning they may not keep pace with the F-47 at maximum speed. This suggests that the F-47 may also cruise at subsonic speeds when operating in coordination with its drones. However, it remains possible that U.S. engineers will enhance the CCAs before their official deployment, bringing their speed and range closer to the fighter's performance. Even with these uncertainties, the information released provides a far more complete picture of the F-47 and its supporting aerial platforms than ever before. While many specifics remain undisclosed, it is already evident that the United States is on the verge of introducing a 6th-generation fighter that merges the best attributes of 4th and 5th-generation aircraft with advanced integrated drone technology. Somewhere deep in the Mexican jungle, a drug lab the size of a small town was cranking out drugs that were killing Americans every single day. This wasn't some backyard operation. They were operating from a billion-dollar facility with concrete bunkers, armed guards, and enough security to make a military base jealous. The cartel bosses running this place thought they were completely safe, hidden under thick jungle canopy where satellites couldn't spot them and law enforcement couldn't touch them. Then one morning the sky exploded, and in just 15 minutes, their entire empire turned to rubble. How was the U.S. Navy able to perform this covert operation? And what aircraft was used in wiping out the drug lab? Join us as we dive deep into the United States operations that wiped out a cartel lab in minutes. The Pentagon had 2 options sitting on the table. Option 1 was the F-22 Raptor, basically a flying ghost that can sneak past any radar system on Earth without making a sound. Option 2 was the F-15 Eagle, which is like strapping wings to a weapons warehouse and teaching it how to fly. Most people would pick the invisible jet for a stealth mission like this, but military planners knew something the general public doesn't. Sometimes people need a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel. The cartel lab wasn't just sitting out in the open waiting to be blown up. These criminals had spent years building an underground fortress with walls thick enough to stop tank shells and bunkers deep enough to survive earthquakes. The F-22 might be invisible, but it can only carry 8 small missiles hidden inside its body, and those tiny weapons would barely scratch the surface of this concrete monster. The F-15, on the other hand, can carry 15 massive bombs on the outside of its wings, bombs specifically designed to punch through the thickest concrete and turn underground bunkers into giant craters. Here's where things get really interesting. The F-15 doesn't need to hide because it has something even better than invisibility. It has electronic warfare systems that make enemy radar stations useless. While the cartel's detection systems were trying to figure out what was happening, the Eagle was jamming their communications, creating fake targets all over their screens, and automatically shooting down any missiles they tried to fire back. By the time they realized what was hitting them, 15 minutes had passed, and their billion-dollar drug empire was nothing but smoking ruins scattered across the jungle floor. This electronic warfare system turned out to be way more valuable than old-school invisibility for this particular mission, and here's why. Stealth fighters like the F-22 become completely visible on radar screens the moment they open their weapon compartments to fire missiles or drop bombs. It's like watching someone try to sneak around in a cloak that disappears the second they reach for their weapon. The F-15 never bothers trying to hide in the first place. Instead, it charges straight in while scrambling every electronic system the enemy has, turning their sophisticated defense networks into expensive paperweights while unleashing enough firepower to level entire buildings. The sheer power of this aircraft is mind-blowing when broken down into simple numbers. Those twin engines produce 58,000 pounds of thrust, which is roughly equivalent to the force generated by a rocket ship during launch, and this massive power allows the plane to carry maximum weapon loads while still flying faster than most enemy fighters can dream of reaching. Think of it like a sports car that can haul a full moving truck's worth of cargo and still outrun everything else on the highway. That's the kind of performance advantage military planners were looking for in this mission. Distance became the final nail in the coffin for the stealth option, because this jungle laboratory was sitting hundreds of miles away from the nearest American airbase, requiring the attack aircraft to fly deep into hostile territory, destroy multiple targets spread across acres of jungle, and make it back home safely without running out of fuel. The F-15's massive fuel tanks and efficient engines provided the endurance needed for this kind of extended combat operation, while the F-22 would have been pushing its range limits just getting to the target area, let alone having enough fuel left for combat maneuvers and the return trip. This drug manufacturing fortress had been pumping out drugs for 3 straight years without anyone finding it, and traditional law enforcement agencies had completely struck out trying to locate the place using normal investigation methods. The military knew they needed something way more powerful than regular detective work, so they sent up the U-2 Dragon Lady, a spy plane that never actually crosses into Mexican airspace because international law forbids that kind of violation. The major breakthrough came from thermal imaging technology that detected something generating massive amounts of heat energy deep under the forest canopy, where nothing should be producing that kind of industrial-level temperature signature. Infrared sensors picked up the glow of heavy machinery and chemical processing equipment hidden beneath layers of trees, since cooking drugs requires extremely high temperatures that create a heat footprint visible from space. Ground surveillance teams moved in to confirm what the satellites suspected, with special operations soldiers disguising themselves as hikers and scientific researchers while approaching the target area from multiple directions, planting tiny sensors that could detect chemical odors carried by jungle winds and electronic listening devices that picked up the sound of generators and ventilation systems. The cartel bosses had no clue that American intelligence agencies had spent 6 full months dissecting every single detail of their operation, like scientists studying bacteria under a microscope. Intelligence analysts knew exactly when lab technicians showed up for work, tracked every chemical delivery truck right down to individual shipments of precursor materials, and surveillance teams had counted security guards while documenting their exact patrol patterns hour by hour. The final breakthrough came when the National Security Agency intercepted communications from cartel leaders who thought their encrypted phones were completely secure, not realizing that American computers could crack their supposedly unbreakable codes within a matter of hours. Every phone conversation these criminals had provided military planners with more precise intelligence about the facility's exact location, defensive measures, and daily operations until they possessed what amounted to complete architectural blueprints of the hidden complex. By October, American intelligence knew which specific buildings housed the actual drug cooking equipment, identified the main chemical storage areas that would create the biggest explosions, and most importantly, had precise global positioning system coordinates for every single structure that needed to be turned into rubble. The hunt phase was officially over, since America's invisible electronic eyes had found their target. But now came the much harder challenge of turning all this intelligence into actual military action. The Oval Office meeting that changed everything lasted 3 intense hours, with President Trump sitting behind the historic Resolute desk, surrounded by his entire national security team, while satellite photographs of the cartel laboratory covered the conference table like pieces of a deadly puzzle. The defense secretary briefed him on various strike options, ranging from surgical precision attacks to complete facility destruction. The Central Intelligence Agency director explained the intelligence breakthrough that had made this opportunity possible, and the Attorney General outlined the complex legal framework needed to authorize military action against what was technically a law enforcement target rather than a traditional military enemy. Trump's decision was absolutely historic in scope and would fundamentally change how America fights the drug war forever. With a single presidential signature, he officially redesignated Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, meaning the Sinaloa cartel and Jalisco New Generation cartel suddenly faced the exact same legal status as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria and al-Qaeda terrorist networks. This wasn't just paperwork or political posturing. This was a formal declaration that unlocked America's full military arsenal against criminal organizations operating across the southern border, creating terrifying new legal realities where anyone providing material support to these groups now faces 20 years in federal prison, with support definitions stretching far beyond drug trafficking to include paying protection money, transporting goods through cartel territory, or even family members sending money home to relatives in cartel-controlled areas. The entire situation created a massive legal nightmare because this cartel laboratory was sitting squarely on Mexican soil, meaning any American military strike would completely violate international law without getting official permission from Mexico City first. Traditional diplomatic negotiations would drag on for months while Americans kept dying from fentanyl overdoses every single day. So Trump decided to skip the slow diplomatic dance and go straight for Mexico's economic jugular instead. The ultimatum hit Mexican officials like a sledgehammer on a cold January morning when it arrived through diplomatic channels, giving Mexico until February to completely crush the cartels or face devastating 25% tariffs on all imports that would put $400 billion in annual trade at serious risk. President Claudia Sheinbaum found herself staring at an absolutely impossible choice during her emergency cabinet meeting, with her foreign minister spreading satellite photographs across the conference table that showed American military assets gathering along the border like storm clouds. Predator drones had quietly relocated to forward operating bases in Texas and Arizona, making it crystal clear that this threat wasn't just about economics. This was about Mexico's very survival as an independent nation. The message from Washington was brutally simple: deliver real results against the cartels, or watch Mexico's entire economy get crushed under the weight of American economic warfare. While Sheinbaum publicly denounced American threats and maintained Mexico's proud stance of independence, her intelligence chief was secretly authorizing expanded cooperation with Central Intelligence Agency surveillance operations, creating a stark contradiction that was both deliberate and dangerous. Mexican officials desperately hoped this delicate balancing act would prevent unilateral American military strikes while still preserving their national dignity on the world stage. But then came the most unprecedented gambit in the entire drug war. Mexico loaded 29 high-profile drug lords onto planes headed for 8 different American cities in what amounted to the most desperate diplomatic move in decades, including Rafael Caro Quintero, whose brutal 1985 assault of Drug Enforcement Administration agent Enrique Camarena had poisoned relations between both countries for generations. This mass extradition was completely unprecedented, since Mexico typically hands over prisoners one at a time after lengthy legal battles that can drag on for years. But shipping 29 major cartel leaders to America all at once sent a clear signal that Mexico was absolutely terrified of facing economic punishment. A former Drug Enforcement Administration operations chief called it historic evidence of Mexico's desperation to avoid having their economy destroyed by American tariffs. Trump responded by announcing a 30-day suspension of the threatened trade penalties, but this reprieve came with strict conditions that Mexico had to meet or face even worse consequences down the road. Mexico agreed to deploy thousands of additional troops to cartel territories and dramatically intensify military operations against fentanyl production facilities. But the crisis had already awakened something far more dangerous than diplomatic pressure. Deep in the Mexican jungle, American surveillance technology had painted the target with invisible electronic crosshairs, and while diplomatic negotiations had bought some precious time, the cartel laboratory kept cooking deadly chemicals while Pentagon war planners prepared for their ultimate test of military precision. The mission required absolutely perfect timing because launching too early would expose the aircraft to dawn light that would make them visible to enemy spotters, while attacking too late risked morning cloud cover that might completely obscure their targets and ruin the entire operation. Each pilot had spent 3 intensive weeks studying satellite images until they could identify every single building from memory, while flight simulators recreated the exact terrain features, weather conditions, and approach angles they would encounter during the real attack. These aviators practiced the attack run dozens of times until muscle memory completely took over their responses, knowing there would be absolutely no second chances once they crossed into Mexican airspace, and the Pentagon chose GBU-39 small-diameter bombs for their surgical precision and ability to minimize collateral damage to surrounding areas. Each F-15 Eagle fighter jet carried exactly 2 precision bombs, creating a devastating total of 24 weapons for the entire strike mission. And these smart bombs used global positioning system guidance that could hit targets within 3 feet of their intended impact point. Laser designators provided crucial backup targeting systems in case satellite signals got jammed or disrupted during the attack, while Pentagon legal teams worked around the clock, preparing thick stacks of justification documents that would explain this military action to Congress and international courts. Military lawyers cited the exact same legal frameworks America had used for terrorist camp strikes in Pakistan and Yemen, pointing to the cartel's new terrorist designation as providing clear legal authority for cross-border military action. Mexico's complete failure to eliminate this deadly threat despite months of diplomatic agreements and promises created solid legal grounds for American self-defense action under international law, which specifically allows cross-border strikes against imminent threats to national security. Pentagon mission planners faced absolutely impossible constraints because the strike had to completely destroy the laboratory while avoiding any civilian casualties that could create an international incident. And intelligence reports showed the facility operated with a skeleton crew during pre-dawn hours when most workers went home to sleep. Timing the attack for exactly 4 in the morning would minimize any potential loss of life while maximizing the destruction of expensive equipment and dangerous chemical stockpiles that could kill millions of Americans. Weather conditions added another critical variable that could make or break the entire mission, since monsoon season brought heavy cloud cover that could completely hide the target from laser-guided weapon systems. Satellite weather forecasts showed an extremely narrow window of clear skies lasting only 2 hours, meaning the strike had to happen within that tight time frame, or military planners would have to wait another full week for favorable weather conditions. Communication security required complete radio silence until the moment weapons were actually released, with pilots navigating using only global positioning system coordinates and pre-programmed waypoints while maintaining zero voice contact with ground controllers, and no data links that enemy signals intelligence could possibly intercept. Mission commanders spent countless hours running through every possible failure scenario they could imagine, asking themselves what would happen if Mexican air defense systems detected the incoming formation of American fighters. The F-15 pilots carried air-to-air missiles for self-defense purposes, but had received strict orders to avoid any engagement unless directly threatened by enemy aircraft, while abort procedures required the entire formation to return home with weapons unexpended rather than risk hitting the wrong target and creating an international catastrophe. The strike force would operate as complete electronic ghosts until the exact moment bombs began falling from the sky, turning a billion-dollar drug empire into smoking rubble within a matter of minutes. The stakes were absolutely enormous because success would eliminate a major source of fentanyl that was killing thousands of Americans every month while demonstrating decisive action against cartel terrorism, but failure could trigger a massive diplomatic crisis with Mexico that might lead to economic retaliation or complete political upheaval between the two countries. Any civilian casualties would completely undermine America's moral authority on the world stage and strengthen anti-American sentiment across all of Latin America, potentially turning allies into enemies for generations to come. Intelligence updates kept arriving every single hour from surveillance assets that were monitoring the target around the clock, with satellite photographs confirming normal activity patterns, heat signatures showing the laboratory operating at full capacity, and guard rotations following completely predictable schedules that indicated business as usual at the billion-dollar drug facility. The final mission briefing took place at exactly midnight, with pilots receiving updated weather reports, precise target coordinates, and rules of engagement that would govern every aspect of the attack. Each aviator signed official documents acknowledging the highly classified nature of this operation, while base security immediately locked down the entire facility with 0 phone calls allowed, no internet access permitted, and absolutely no communication with the outside world until after mission completion. At exactly 2 in the morning, ground crews began their final preparations by loading and arming weapon systems, topping off fuel tanks to maximum capacity, and checking aircraft systems twice to ensure everything worked perfectly. At 4 in the morning sharp, 12 F-15 Eagle fighters lifted off into complete darkness, carrying America's deadliest message toward a target that had no idea death was approaching from above. The formation climbed through Mexican airspace like predators hunting their prey, maintaining absolute radio silence as they approached the rugged Sinaloa Mountains, while their advanced engines sent threats that radar screens across Mexico couldn't detect. Advanced electronic warfare technology made these heavily armed fighters completely invisible to ground-based detection systems, creating the perfect conditions for a surprise attack that would catch the enemy completely off guard. 24 bombs dropped simultaneously from external weapon racks, with absolutely no smoke trails marking their descent and no warning sirens announcing the incoming destruction that was about to turn a billion-dollar drug empire into scattered rubble. The weapons simply vanished into the jungle darkness like invisible harbingers of death, guided by satellite signals toward their program coordinates, while cartel workers below continued their deadly business, completely unaware that their world was about to explode. The first explosion completely shattered the main chemical storage building, causing industrial tanks containing thousands of gallons of dangerous precursor chemicals to erupt in massive orange flames that lit up the forest canopy like artificial daylight, followed by secondary blasts as stored materials ignited and sent toxic smoke billowing through the trees in every direction. The Middle East just witnessed something wild. Iran made a decision that sent shockwaves across the globe. They fired ballistic missiles directly at the most significant American military base in the region. What makes this story even more fascinating is that despite the dramatic nature of the attack, something unexpected occurred. Every single Iranian missile was shot down before it could hit anything. Did their missiles fail because American defenses are simply that good? Or because Iran's much-feared arsenal isn't as dangerous as they've been claiming for years? Join us as we break down what really happened between Iran, the United States, and how the attack unfolded. When Iran launched a massive missile strike against Al Udeid Air Base, the biggest U.S. military facility in the Middle East, Iranian forces called it Operation Glad Tidings of Victory, sending dozens of ballistic missiles screaming toward the base in a coordinated assault that changed everything. This was not a minor border clash or proxy conflict. Iran had just fired directly at American forces, marking the most serious escalation between these two powers in decades. The attack came after recent U.S. airstrikes hammered Iranian nuclear sites, and now Tehran was hitting back hard. Al Udeid sits in one of the most critical spots on the global chessboard. The base hosts thousands of American troops and serves as a command center for operations across the region. When those missiles started falling, it sent shock waves far beyond the Middle East. The Iranian strike is bigger than just retaliation. It's a direct challenge to American military dominance in a region where both countries have been circling each other for years. What started as targeted strikes against nuclear facilities has now exploded into a direct military confrontation that could reshape the entire Middle East. Somewhere between 6 and 19 missiles tore through the night sky, heading straight for the base. The sight alone was enough to make anyone's heart stop. Dozens of incoming warheads that could have turned the facility into rubble and unalived hundreds of people. But then something incredible happened. Every single missile got knocked out of the sky. American air defense systems went to work, tracking each incoming threat and taking them down one by one. When the smoke cleared, the results were almost unbelievable. 0 casualties, 0 damage, and the base kept running like nothing happened. It was a flawless defensive performance that left military analysts scratching their heads. The big question everyone started asking was whether Iran actually wanted to hit anything at all. Some experts think the whole thing was more about sending a message than causing real destruction. Maybe Iran picked targets they knew would be heavily defended, or maybe they gave a warning through back channels. Either way, the attack failed if the goal was to hurt American forces or knock out the base. But if the goal was to show they could reach US targets without starting World War III, then maybe it worked exactly as planned. But other experts see this completely differently. They think Iran seriously miscalculated and ended up looking weak instead of strong. Their missiles, which they've been bragging about for years, got swatted down like flies. If the goal was to project power, this backfired spectacularly. The attack definitely got everyone's attention across the Middle East. Countries in the region are watching closely to see how this plays out. But whether Iran looks more dangerous or more incompetent depends entirely on what they were actually trying to accomplish. Right now, nobody knows for sure if this was brilliant strategic messaging or a massive blunder that exposed serious weaknesses in Iran's military capabilities. The answer to that question could reshape how other countries view Iran's threats going forward. The American defense systems lit up the desert night like the 4th of July. Interceptor missiles launched one after another, tracking down every incoming threat and blowing them apart before they could hit anything. From miles away, it probably looked like some kind of fireworks show. Bright flashes and explosions scattered across the dark sky above Al Udeid. But down on the ground, everything stayed perfectly normal. No bomb craters appeared in the sand. The medical teams had nothing to do. Nobody got hurt, nothing got damaged, and life at the base went on like any other night. That is when military analysts started connecting the dots. This was not really an attack meant to destroy anything. Iran basically put on a show, launching enough missiles to make headlines, but doing it in a way that guaranteed they wouldn't actually hit their targets. Iran gets to say they retaliated against American forces, but nobody passed and nothing got destroyed. No dead soldiers means no pressure for massive retaliation. No damaged infrastructure means the conflict doesn't spiral completely out of control. It was like a perfectly choreographed dance where both sides knew the steps. Iran gets to look tough for their domestic audience, America gets to showcase their defense systems, and somehow nobody ends up starting World War III over it. This issue started after Operation Midnight Hammer with the American airstrikes that took out 3 Iranian nuclear sites. Iran had to respond somehow, but here's where it gets interesting. They basically told everyone exactly what they were planning to do. Intelligence sources later confirmed that Iran quietly tipped off both Qatar and the United States before launching those missiles. They gave a warning about the timing, the targets, everything. That's like calling someone to tell them exactly when and where a surprise party is happening. It defeats the entire purpose. Military strikes work because of surprise. Catch the enemy off guard, hit them before they can react, cause maximum damage with minimal warning. But Iran threw all of that out the window. They made sure American forces had plenty of time to get ready, activate all their defenses, and prepare for exactly what was coming. Once the Americans knew the missiles were coming, the whole thing turned into a completely different kind of event. Instead of a real military attack, it became more like a rehearsal where both sides knew their roles. Iran got to fire missiles and claim they hit back, while America got to show off how well its defense systems work. When both sides know exactly what's going to happen, it stops being warfare and starts being political theater. Iran needed to respond to those nuclear facility strikes, but they found a way to do it without actually starting a real war. President Trump didn't hold back when he addressed the nation about the missile attack. He basically called the whole thing a joke, describing it as a staged play instead of any kind of serious military action. Trump even sarcastically thanked Iran for giving everyone a heads up before launching their missiles. His mockery didn't stop there. Trump suggested that if this was Iran's idea of retaliation, maybe their military commanders needed to go back to school and learn how warfare actually works. The president's tone was completely dismissive, treating the entire incident like some kind of amateur hour performance. The numbers backed up Trump's ridicule. 0 missiles hit their targets, 0 damage to American equipment or facilities, 0 injuries to any personnel. The base kept running its normal operations the entire time, like nothing had even happened. From Trump's perspective, Iran had just handed him a perfect propaganda victory. They launched what sounded like a major attack, but accomplished absolutely nothing. Instead of looking strong and dangerous, Iran ended up looking incompetent and weak on the world stage. This missile attack might not have damaged any buildings or hurt anyone, but it hit something else that could be even more important: America's reputation for being tough when threatened. Here is the problem. When Iran can fire missiles at the biggest US military base in the Middle East, and basically nothing happens to them in return, other countries take notice. Every time America lets something like this slide without hitting back hard, it makes the next attack more likely to happen. North Korea is definitely watching the situation. So is Russia, China too. These countries are all testing boundaries with America in different ways, and they're paying close attention to how each provocation gets handled. If firing missiles at American bases doesn't trigger serious consequences, what's to stop someone from trying something bigger next time? It is like dealing with bullies. Once they realize they can push someone around without getting punched back, they keep pushing harder. The same logic applies to hostile nations. Each successful provocation that goes unanswered makes the next escalation seem more reasonable and less risky. The missiles themselves didn't destroy anything tangible at Al Udeid Air Base, but they might have chipped away at something much more valuable: the fear that keeps America's enemies from taking bigger risks. When deterrence starts breaking down, that's when things can get really dangerous, really fast. Washington's slow reaction to the missile strike basically advertised American weakness to the entire world. When hostile countries see America taking time to think things over instead of hitting back immediately, it changes their calculations about what they can get away with. The math is pretty simple from their perspective. If America hesitates after getting attacked directly, maybe it'll hesitate again next time. Maybe they'll hesitate when something even bigger happens. That kind of thinking makes dangerous countries more willing to roll the dice and see what happens. This creates a snowball effect that keeps getting worse. Iran fires missiles and nothing major happens to them. North Korea sees this and thinks maybe they can get away with something too. Russia notices the pattern and decides to push a little harder somewhere else. Each time America doesn't respond with overwhelming force, the next country in line feels more confident about testing boundaries. The problem isn't just about Iran anymore. It's about every hostile nation watching how America handles direct attacks on its military. When enemies start believing America will talk instead of fight, they stop being afraid of American power. This cycle keeps feeding itself until someone finally pushes too far and forces a massive response. But by then, the damage to American credibility had already spread across multiple conflicts and regions. The world becomes less stable because everyone thinks America won't defend its red lines anymore. While Iran hoped to project strength through its missile demonstration, regional neighbors interpreted the attack very differently and responded with alarm rather than admiration. Qatar, which hosts Al Udeid Air Base and thousands of American troops, immediately condemned the strike as a violation of its sovereignty, since the attack essentially turned Qatari territory into a battleground without permission. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain quickly closed portions of their airspace and elevated their military alert levels, showing how Iran's actions had created fear rather than respect among the very countries it hoped to influence. The stock markets told the real story about Iran's missile attack better than any news report could. Oil prices barely budged when those missiles started flying, which is pretty incredible when it happens near the biggest American military base in the Middle East. Anytime missiles start flying around oil-producing regions, traders panic and energy prices shoot through the roof. Everyone assumes supply chains will get disrupted and conflicts will spread. That's been the pattern for decades. But this time was completely different. Oil prices actually dropped a little bit right after the attack, then just settled back to normal levels. Iran's missile strike backfired diplomatically, pushing away potential allies instead of rallying support for its cause. Diplomats from Jordan, Egypt, and Turkey privately expressed concerns about Iran's reckless decision-making, viewing the attack as a risky move that delivered no meaningful gains. This shift in regional perception creates a dangerous cycle for Iran, as growing isolation forces the country to rely more heavily on military demonstrations to project power, which only highlights its weaknesses further. The choice of target revealed a major tactical error that undermined Iran's entire operation. Al Udeid Air Base represents the most heavily defended United States installation in the Middle East, equipped with advanced radar systems and multiple layers of air defense technology. By targeting such a well-protected facility, Iran essentially guaranteed that its missiles would be intercepted, turning what should have been a show of strength into a demonstration of military inadequacy. The complete failure of the strike exposed serious flaws in Iran's missile capabilities and targeting systems. Every single missile was intercepted before reaching its target, resulting in zero destruction, zero injuries, and zero disruption to American military operations. For a country that wants recognition as a regional power, this kind of public failure damages credibility more than any diplomatic setback could. The attack raised questions across Europe and the Gulf states about Iran's actual military capabilities, rather than inspiring fear or respect. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers handled the entire operation. These aircraft were the only ones that could carry bombs big enough to punch through Iran's buried nuclear sites and actually destroy them. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed that the B-2s flew deep into Iranian territory and made it back without anyone detecting them. According to Hegseth, this was the longest B-2 mission since 2001 and the biggest B-2 strike ever conducted. The choice of aircraft made perfect sense. Iran had built these nuclear facilities underground specifically to protect them from regular bombing runs. Standard fighter jets simply don't carry the kind of massive bunker-buster bombs needed to crack through all that concrete and steel. Only the B-2 could handle this kind of mission. These stealth bombers can fly thousands of miles without being seen on radar, carry enormous payloads, and hit targets that other aircraft can't even reach. The fact that they completed such a long-range mission into heavily defended airspace and came home undetected shows exactly why America spent so much money developing these planes. The Northrop B-2 Spirit represents one of the most advanced military aircraft ever built. This American heavy strategic bomber uses something called low observable stealth technology, which basically means it can slip past even the most sophisticated enemy air defenses without being detected. Think of it like an invisibility cloak for aircraft. Enemy radar systems simply cannot see it coming. Most people know it simply as the stealth bomber, and it has become the go-to aircraft when America needs to strike targets that other planes could never reach. When it comes to firepower, the B-2 Spirit can carry an impressive arsenal of conventional weapons. These include standard Mark 82 and Mark 84 bombs, CBU-87 combined effects munitions, Gator mines, and the CBU-97 sensor-fused weapon. But the real game changer is its ability to carry the massive ordnance penetrator, a 30,000-pound bomb designed specifically to destroy heavily reinforced underground bunkers. The B-2 can carry up to 2 of these massive weapons, one in each bomb bay, and as of 2012, it remains the only aircraft capable of deploying this devastating munition. The aircraft also features cutting-edge technology that makes it incredibly effective in combat situations. The low probability of intercept AN/APQ-181 multi-mode radar works as part of a sophisticated digital navigation system. This system includes terrain-following radar and global positioning system guidance, along with the NAS-26 astro-inertial navigation system that was originally developed in the 1950s. All of these technologies work together to help the aircraft navigate precisely to its targets while avoiding detection. Perhaps most importantly, the B-2 includes a defensive management system that constantly monitors for potential threats during missions. This system can automatically assess how dangerous different enemy defenses might be and recommend the safest routes to avoid them. Recent upgrades have made this system even more capable of detecting radar emissions from air defense systems and then feeding that information to an auto router that can change the flight path in real time. This means the aircraft can automatically adjust its route to stay as safe as possible while completing its mission. Flying the B-2 Spirit is nothing like piloting a regular aircraft because of its unique flying wing design. This shape makes the plane naturally unstable in the air, similar to trying to balance a paper airplane that wants to tumble in every direction. To solve this problem, the B-2 uses an incredibly sophisticated quadruplex, computer-controlled, fly-by-wire flight control system. This means that computers are constantly making tiny adjustments to keep the aircraft stable without the pilot having to do anything. The pilot gives general commands about where to go, but the computers handle all the precise movements needed to keep the plane flying smoothly. The aircraft gathers information about flying conditions through special pitot-static sensing plates instead of the traditional pitot tubes found on most planes. Regular pitot tubes would stick out from the aircraft and show up on enemy radar, completely defeating the stealth design. These sensing plates measure things like airspeed and the angle of attack while staying completely flush with the aircraft's surface. The flight control system also includes both hydraulic and electrical components with multiple backup systems. So if one part fails, others can take over to keep the plane flying safely. Getting directional control on a stealth aircraft presented unique challenges because most traditional control methods would increase the radar signature. After testing various options, Northrop engineers settled on a combination of split brake rudders and differential thrust from the engines. This means the plane can change direction by using different power levels from its engines rather than relying entirely on visible control surfaces. Engine thrust became crucial not just for forward movement, but also for controlling how the aircraft pitches up and down and rolls from side to side. The B-2 has 4 pairs of control surfaces along the back edge of its wings, and different surfaces work at different times depending on flight conditions. Most of these surfaces operate throughout normal flight, but the inner elevons typically only activate during slow-speed situations like landing approaches. During takeoff, all the elevons stay drooped downward until the aircraft reaches sufficient airspeed. This prevents damage from ground contact and helps create the proper nose-down attitude needed for a successful takeoff sequence. The war on drugs has entered a new phase. For the first time, Washington has authorized the Pentagon to use lethal force against Mexico's cartels. In a single strike, a USM-109 self-propelled howitzer destroyed 15 cartel vehicles, an unmistakable sign that surveillance is over and firepower has begun. This is not a drill. The question now, how far will America go, and how long can the cartels withstand the assault? Join us as we uncover the strategy behind America's first direct strikes on the cartels. The United States military has deployed 4,000 Marines and sailors to the waters surrounding the Caribbean islands of Latin America, signaling the start of direct operations against organized drug cartels. At the center of this deployment is the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, embarked aboard the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group, or ARG, one of the Navy's most advanced expeditionary forces, purpose-built to project power from the sea to any point on the globe. The ARG is composed of 3 principal amphibious vessels, the USS Iwo Jima, the USS San Antonio, and the USS New York. Each ship is engineered for combat resilience, operational flexibility, and sustained offensive capability. The USS Iwo Jima, a landing helicopter dock, functions as a floating command base for Marines and aircraft alike. It is capable of launching helicopters, MV-22 Osprey tiltrotors, and amphibious assault vehicles. Defensive systems such as the Rolling Airframe Missile System and the Phalanx Close-In Weapon System protect the ship from incoming missiles, aircraft, and surface threats, ensuring operational readiness even in contested waters. The USS San Antonio and USS New York, both amphibious transport docks, are stealth-enhanced platforms designed to transport thousands of Marines, vehicles, and essential equipment directly to shore. They support over-the-horizon amphibious operations through a combination of landing craft, helicopters, and tiltrotor aircraft. Modern command and control systems allow real-time coordination with airborne units, naval forces, and Marines on the ground. Reinforced hulls and structures provide significant blast resistance, enhancing survivability in hostile environments. Together, these vessels form a mobile, heavily defended base capable of sustained operations far from home ports. The 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit itself brings unmatched versatility and combat capability. Consisting of approximately 2,200 Marines, the unit is trained in amphibious warfare, urban combat, reconnaissance, and special operations. It is equipped with armored vehicles, amphibious assault vehicles, artillery, and air support assets, including AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters, AV-8B Harrier jump jets, and MV-22 Ospreys. This combination of firepower and mobility enables rapid, decisive strikes against both land and coastal targets. The ARG's effectiveness also stems from its integrated network of advanced technologies. Ships, aircraft, and marine units are connected through secure, real-time command and control systems, allowing rapid intelligence sharing, precision targeting, and coordinated operations. This connectivity enables the ARG to conduct amphibious assaults, humanitarian missions, maritime security, or specialized operations with speed and accuracy. Its mobility ensures a global response capability within days, projecting both deterrent and offensive power. Additional naval assets, including a nuclear-powered attack submarine, multiple destroyers, and a guided missile cruiser, further support the expedition. Among the military vehicles reportedly being deployed is the M109 self-propelled howitzer, produced by BAE Systems and a mainstay of U.S. Army artillery units. This tracked vehicle, weighing 27.5 tons, measures 30 feet in length, 10 feet 4 inches in width, and 10 feet 8 inches in height. It accommodates a crew of 6, a commander, gunner, driver, and 3 ammunition specialists. The vehicle is powered by a Detroit diesel 8-box 71T engine paired with an Allison XTG 411-4A cross-drive transmission, enabling a top speed of 35 miles per hour and an operational range of 216 miles. Constructed with all-welded aluminum armor, the M109 offers protection against small arms fire and shell fragments. The driver sits at the front left of the hull, with the power pack located to the right and the turret at the rear. Visibility is provided through 3 M45-day periscopes, one of which can be replaced with a passive night vision periscope. The rear-mounted turret features a fully traversable design, with a commander's cupola on the right side offering 360-degree rotation and a pine tool-mounted .50 caliber machine gun. The gunner operates from the left side of the turret, while twin rear doors facilitate ammunition resupply. A manually lowered spade at the rear of the hull stabilizes the vehicle when firing top charges, ensuring precision during artillery operations. The M109 also employs a torsion bar suspension system on each side, supported by 7 dual rubber-tired road wheels. The drive sprocket is positioned at the front, with the idler at the rear, and there are no track return rollers. Its tracks are of a single-pin, center guide design, featuring replaceable rubber pads to enhance mobility over varied terrain. Equipped with night vision capabilities, the M109 does not protect against nuclear, biological, or chemical threats. However, the vehicle can be adapted for amphibious operations with a kit of 9 airbags, 4 along each hull side and 1 at the front. Once inflated, these allow the vehicle to propel itself across rivers at speeds up to 4 miles per hour using its tracks. The primary armament consists of a 155mm M126 howitzer mounted in an M127 assembly, complete with a fume extractor and a large muzzle brake. Its effective firing range extends to 10 miles, with a maximum rate of fire of 6 rounds per minute and a sustained rate of 3 rounds per minute. The recoil system is hydro-pneumatic, while the Welland-step thread breech block ensures secure operation. Hydraulic systems control gun elevation, depression, and turret traverse, with manual overrides available for emergencies. Fire control equipment includes the M118C elbow telescope for direct fire, providing 4 times magnification and a 10-degree field of view, the M117 panoramic telescope for indirect fire, and the M1A1 gunner's quadrant. Beyond the hardware, U.S. military officials are preparing to expand operational options in Latin America. Historically, the Navy had to coordinate with the Coast Guard to carry out lethal actions or arrests. Current planning includes multiple kinetic options against drug cartels, ranging from potential missile strikes launched from destroyers to closer collaboration with Mexican authorities to target criminal networks directly. Officials envision the construction of barracks and secure operational bases in Mexico, allowing American Special Operations Forces to conduct precision capture missions against high-value targets. In May, U.S. and Mexican forces conducted a rare raid on 3 major drug laboratories in Sinaloa, seizing fentanyl and chemical precursors, operations performed directly on cartel territory. Despite these measures, U.S. officials acknowledge clear limits under current rules of engagement. As a Washington Post report notes, military strikes remain audacious and potentially unlikely to receive presidential approval, signaling both the ambition and the caution guiding U.S. operations in the region. In recent months, the United States quietly deployed 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers to the Gulf of Mexico, a move without precedent in the region's modern naval history. These warships had only recently concluded missions in the Red Sea, where they played a role in countering Houthi attacks. The Arleigh Burke destroyer is one of the most advanced and heavily armed platforms the U.S. Navy has ever produced, combining layered defenses, long-range strike capability, and sophisticated electronic warfare systems. Each ship carries the ANSLQ-32 electronic warfare suite, designed to detect, track, and disrupt enemy radar. Variants such as the SLQ-32V3, V6, and V7 add radar jamming capabilities, giving the destroyer the ability to blind hostile sensors before an attack can be launched. Their firepower is centered on the Mark 41 vertical launching system, with 90 cells on the early versions and 96 cells on later ships. These cells carry a wide range of missiles, making the destroyer more heavily armed than many cruisers that preceded it. The standard missile family provides the primary air defense shield. The SM-2 offers both medium and long-range protection. At the same time, the SM-6 extends engagement ranges beyond the horizon and is capable of targeting both aircraft and warships. Advanced seeker technology allows these missiles to engage multiple targets at once, with minimal reliance on shipboard radar illumination. For land attack, the Arleigh Burkes rely on the Tomahawk cruise missile. The latest Block VA variant has introduced new capabilities. The Block VA, or Maritime Strike Tomahawk, extends the destroyer's ability to engage enemy warships, while the Block VB carries a new multi-effects warhead optimized for hardened or diverse land targets. With up to 96 Tomahawks loaded, a single destroyer can strike infrastructure, bases, or cartel-linked facilities far inland. The deployment of these destroyers positions them within reach of cartel-controlled laboratories and smuggling infrastructure, giving the United States the option to carry out precision strikes at sea or on land if required. Public statements, however, present the mission in different terms. Both Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador and U.S. Ambassador Ronald Johnson have stressed that the operations are framed as cooperative rather than unilateral. Ambassador Johnson wrote on X, "This is not about the United States acting alone. It's about building a joint, unshakable front with Mexico to defend our citizens, dismantle the cartel's networks, and ensure that the only people who need to fear for their future are those who profit from murder, addiction, and chaos." Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum responded with equal caution, asserting, "The United States is not sending its military to Mexico. We cooperate, we collaborate, but there will be no invasion. We are ruling this out absolutely." Earlier, in April 2025, the White House sought permission for U.S. troops to cross the Mexican border to assist in combat operations, including the use of lethal force against cartel targets. President Sheinbaum declined the proposal, maintaining sovereignty and operational control. While discussions of drug cartels typically focus on the United States and Mexico, the latest orders reveal a broader operational focus, targeting a country rarely mentioned in cartel narratives: Venezuela. On July 25, 2025, the U.S. government officially designated the Venezuelan cocaine cartel, Deo Sols, as a foreign terrorist organization. This cartel is alleged to operate as an extension of the Venezuelan government, comprised of military officers and political elites. Its origins trace back to the 1990s, when traffickers in Colombia began bribing Venezuelan border guards evolving into what U.S. authorities now describe as a narco-terrorist enterprise with state-level involvement. Unlike Mexico, the official position of the United States is that Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro directly controls the De Sols cartel, and that his government functions as a narco-terrorist state, and this has been the U.S. stance for several years. The cartel is alleged to enjoy protection through its ties to senior Venezuelan officials. Its name, De Sols, is said to reference the Venezuelan military, translating roughly to Cartel of the Suns, with sun drawn from the insignia found on military general epaulets. In essence, the cartel operates as a covert arm of the Venezuelan state, functioning not as a traditional private military contractor, but as a private criminal enterprise embedded within government structures. Unlike Mexico, which is viewed as a partner and diplomatic ally, Venezuela is regarded as a hostile state. McDermott, co-founder of Inside Crime, explains, "The difference in Venezuela compared to Mexico and Colombia is that a significant portion of the business is managed within the state. Supporting evidence includes testimonies from defectors, alongside documented instances of Venezuelan military flights caught transporting narcotics to destinations, including Spain and the United States. These factors altered the U.S. risk calculus. Operations against Venezuela are considered legitimate actions against a hostile nation, unlike interventions in Mexico, where careful diplomacy must be maintained. The deployment of U.S. forces near Venezuelan waters is strategically significant, as these routes are major channels for illicit substances traveling from Venezuela through Mexico and the Caribbean islands before reaching the United States. The official U.S. designation of De Sols as a foreign terrorist organization underscores these concerns. According to the announcement, the cartel has provided material support to both the Arauca-Tren and the Sinaloa cartel while operating directly from Venezuela. The U.S. asserts that Maduro has corrupted multiple branches of the Venezuelan government, including segments of the army, intelligence services, legislature, and judiciary, to facilitate the cartel's trafficking operations to the United States. In response, the White House announced a $50 million reward for information leading to the arrest or conviction of Nicolas Maduro for violations of U.S. narcotics law. The tensions between the United States and Venezuela are rooted in political as well as economic factors. Since 2020, Maduro is accused of consolidating power, effectively ending democratic governance during the 2024 election cycle. Venezuela also holds the world's largest proven oil reserves, surpassing even Saudi Arabia, and maintains strict state control over these resources, which the U.S. claims Maduro leverages as a political and strategic tool. From a national security perspective, Venezuela hosts Russian military advisors and maintains extensive arms programs with Russia, including granting port access to Russian warships. Russian bombers have been stationed in the country, and S-400 anti-aircraft systems operate on Venezuelan soil, marking a rare deployment of such advanced weapons in the Western Hemisphere. In addition, China has heavily invested in Venezuela's infrastructure, while Iran supplies oil tankers, military technology, and Quds Force operatives, its equivalent of a covert intelligence service. For Washington, Venezuela represents a strategic foothold where key geopolitical adversaries are permitted to operate. Consequently, what may appear as a counter-cartel mission in the Western Hemisphere carries the potential to escalate into a confrontation with other major powers. From Maduro's perspective, the U.S. presence is viewed as hostile interference, infringing upon national sovereignty. Venezuelan authorities cite a long history of American interventions in Latin America and frame the current operations as a continuation of that pattern, attributing the situation to the failures of the war on drugs. Public opinion within Venezuela remains divided, with factions both supporting and opposing Maduro. Insiders close to the White House, however, describe the mission's objective as the complete dismantling of Venezuelan cartel operations across the Western Hemisphere, signaling the extensive scope of the operation. A significant challenge for the U.S. military is its relative lack of institutional relationships in the region, compared with agencies like the FBI and DEA, which have maintained operational networks with Mexican authorities since the 1980s. To address this gap, the Pentagon recently established the Joint Service Interagency Advisory Group. This initiative integrates U.S. Special Forces operators with experts from federal agencies such as the FBI and DEA, leveraging on-the-ground contacts and intelligence networks developed over decades. Direct action missions in Latin America have historical precedent, often serving as cautionary examples. In 2012, the DEA conducted Operation Anvil in Honduras, deploying tactical teams, effectively SUAT-like units, alongside Honduran police for a 90-day mission targeting drug traffickers. The operation, however, included 3 controversial incidents of deadly force that resulted in civilian casualties, provoking international criticism. Subsequent review by the U.S. Department of State concluded that insufficient operational planning and unclear rules of engagement were major factors in the failure. Following the operation, the DEA tactical teams were ordered to withdraw and were ultimately disbanded. The current campaign extends far beyond operations abroad. On the U.S. side of the border, the Department of Defense has designated nearly 1/3 of the southern border as national defense areas. These zones empower U.S. troops to detain individuals crossing illegally, circumventing traditional restrictions on military involvement in law enforcement. Roughly 1/3 of the U.S.-Mexico border is now under militarized control. Over 7,000 troops patrol hundreds of miles across Texas, New Mexico, and soon Arizona, supported by more than 50 Stryker armored vehicles operating in the desert borderlands. To date, over 1,400 migrants have been charged with trespassing on military-controlled land. These measures have disrupted the flow of drugs and migrants into the United States. The crackdown has cut cartel funding streams, and high-profile arrests of top cartel leaders in Mexico have sparked a violent internal conflict, forcing some cartels to merge in an effort to survive. Parallel to this militarization is Operation at Large, the largest coordinated interior enforcement effort since the 1940s. It involves more than 5,000 federal law enforcement personnel, including 3,000 ICE agents, 1,800 members of Homeland Security, and additional personnel from the Justice Department, U.S. Marshals, and Border Protection. The operation reportedly includes requests for up to 20,000 National Guard troops to support ICE activities, marking the most extensive federal deployment in the interior of the country in modern history. Admiral Halsey, who assumed command of U.S. forces in Central and South America in November 2024, recently outlined his strategy to Congress. The United States of America and the many nations and territories that comprise Latin America and the Caribbean are bound together by rich cultural tradition, family bonds, economic endeavor, and enduring commitment to democratic principles, he stated. He emphasized that the greatest threat is not solely the cartels, but also the strategic actions of Russia and China in the region. These authoritarian regimes continue their methodical incursion into the region, using varying tools towards separate end states. We can stem this tide by standing together, shoulder to shoulder with our allies and partners. Our partners want to work with the United States, but to maintain their trust and confidence, they must feel and see our presence and commitment before it's too late. Media reports indicate that the president has issued a classified directive, potentially a presidential finding for covert action or a presidential memorandum, enabling sensitive military operations. From this directive, officers develop CON plans that evolve into fully executable operational plans. Taken together, these developments reveal the emergence of a multi-front campaign: militarized buffer zones along U.S. soil, mass interior enforcement raids supported by unprecedented numbers of federal agents, military presence in urban centers such as Los Angeles, expanded intelligence collection abroad, and now directives for overt kinetic operations. The United States is conducting a campaign across the Western Hemisphere unlike anything seen in recent memory, integrating both domestic and international efforts with the military and intelligence community at the forefront. Thanks for watching. Before you go, click the link on your screen to check out another video. See you there.